안녕하십니까? 제19회 제주 포럼에 참석해주신 여러분. 지금부터 특별세션 글로벌 협력 등불로서의 지방외교 세션을 시작하겠습니다. 원활한 행사 진행을 위해서 휴대전화는 매너 모드로 전환해 주시길 바랍니다. 본 행사는 한국어, 영어, 일본어로 동시 진행됩니다. 통역을 원하시는 분들께서는 자리에 놓여진 통역기를 착용하시기 바랍니다. 한국어는 1번, 영어는 2번, 일본어는 3번입니다.
Please make sure your cell phone is either off or on silent mode. Korean, English, Japanese simultaneous interpretation is provided in this session. If you want to hear the interpretation, please wear the receiver placed on your seat. Korean is channel 1. English is channel 2. Japanese is channel 3.
Good afternoon. I'm Noel Latif, President of the Foreign Policy Association based in New York City. I am pleased to be your moderator this afternoon. We are going to begin with our keynote address. I have the honor to introduce a statesman who embodies the spirit of diplomacy and the essence of global understanding and international cooperation. I refer, of course, to our host, the governor of Jeju Special Governing Province, Governor Oh. Governor Oh's commitment to international relations is truly inspiring.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다. 제주특별자치도지사 그리고 제주포럼 조직위원회 위원장을 맡고 있는 오영훈입니다. 오늘 제주포럼 특별 세션에 참석해 주신 모든 분들께 고마운 말씀, 환영의 말씀을 전합니다. 특히 오늘 사회를 맡아 주실 미국 외교정책협회 노엘 라티프 회장님, 그리고 귀한 말씀을 함께 해주실 일본의 도쿠시마현 고토다 마사지미 지사님과 미국 국무부 마니샤싱 전 차관보님, 그리고 웨슬리언 대학교 메리 앨리스 하다스 교수님, 그리고 오스트리아 찰스부르크주 필스모스시 크리스찬 무슬레 호너 시장님께도 감사드립니다. 그리고 더군다나 이 자리에 직접 찾아와 주신 저희 도민과 학생 여러분들께도 고마운 말씀 드립니다. 제가 기조연설을 하도록 되어 있는데 분량이 20분 분량이나 돼서 또 다음 분들 말씀하시기에 시간을 너무 많이 뺏는 것 같아서 10분 이내로 줄일까 합니다. 괜찮으시죠? 박수 한번 쳐주시겠습니까? 제주도는 좀 특별한 곳입니다. 많은 사람들이 알 수 없는데 독립국가가 존재했던 곳이죠. 무려 2000년 전에 탐나국이라는 독립왕국을 세우고 1000년 이상 나라를 유지했던 그런 역사를 가진 특별한 곳입니다. 한반도와는 다르게 한반도와 그리고 일본, 중국 대륙 그리고 동남아시아 해상 항로를 개척해 나가면서 부를 축적했고 그리고 나라를 유지했던 그런 경험을 갖고 있습니다. 이것은 삼국유사나 그리고 당서에 구당서에 관련 역사적 기록들이 확인되고 있고 그런 탐나 왕국이 가지는 DNA를 제주 특별자치도는 계속해서 이어왔습니다. 탐나 왕국이 존재할 때까지만 해도 고려 시대까지만 해도 한반도와 중국 대륙 일본을 넘나들던 이 교류의 역사가 있을 때는 탐나인들이 세계를 무대로 뻗어나갔고 그런 과정에서 무역을 통해서 인간다운 삶을 누릴 수 있었습니다. 그렇지만 어떤 때에는 교류가 단절되었고 봉쇄당하기도 했습니다. 조선시대 대표적인 봉쇄 조치는 출륙 금지령이라는 조치입니다. 배를 타고 나가서도 안 되고 어디든 갈 수가 없었죠. 오직 허용된 건 말을 보내는 것만이 허용되었던 시대가 있었습니다. 실제로 탐나국 시절에는 선박 건조술이나 항해술이 매우 뛰어나서 태산까지 산둥반도에 있는 태산까지 갔을 정도가 됐지만 배도 만들지 못하게 했고 조업도 태왓이라는 뗏목 정도 수준에서 이 연안에서만 활동하게 했던 적도 있습니다. 제주도는 다시 새롭게 교류했던 게 일본과의 교류입니다. 1923년 제주항과 일본의 오사카항을 연결하는 군대환이라는 여객선이 정기적으로 운항을 하게 됩니다. 부산과도 연결이 안 돼 있었고 목포와도 연결이 안 돼 있었지만 가장 먼저 일본과 다시 출구가 열리게 된 것이었습니다. 그런 과정에서 제주도의 수많은 사람들이 일본으로 일하러 공부하러 떠나게 됐고 그렇게 가서 일하고 공부해온 사람들은 제주를 근대화시키는 주역으로 성장하게 됐었습니다. 이렇듯 제주는 교류와 협력이 열린 공간에서는 상당한 발전을 지속가능한 성장을 이루어왔지만 봉쇄되었을 때 출구가 막혔을 때는 가장 심한 고통에 직면하지 않을 수 없었습니다. 이렇듯 탐나의 역사에서 그리고 그 이후의 제주의 역사에서 제주는 고립된 섬으로 존재하는 것이 아니라 바로 대륙과 해양 세력과 인근 나라들과 도시들과 연대하고 교류하고 협력했을 때 살아갈 수 있다는 것을 보여준 바가 있습니다. 그래서 민선 8기가 출범한 이후에 아시안 플러스 알파라는 이름을 내걸고 외교 정책을 지방외교의 새로운 정책을 제시했습니다. 이 앞바다에 보이는 바다가 바로 태평양이고 대한민국의 세계로 나가는 길목이 바로 이 서귀포 앞바다입니다. 그래서 우리는 아시안 지역으로 그리고 더 큰 아랍 지역으로 나가야 된다고 생각했고 그 이름을 아시안 플러스 알파라고 명명하기도 했습니다. 그러면서 아시안의 주요국과 주요 도시들과 자매기련 MOU를 체결해 나갔고 수많은 도시들과 교류 협력을 강화해 나가고 있습니다. 이곳 제주 포럼에도 아세안 사무총장이 참석을 하고 그리고 에이펙 사무국장도 함께 참석해서 연대의 의지를 과시해 주는 것도 표현해 주는 것도 그런 정책의 성과로 생각합니다. 지난해 제주 포럼에서 저는 처음으로 지방 외교가 국가 외교를 넘어서서 현재 우리가 겪고 있는 지구촌 복합 위기를 극복할 수 있고 그리고 에너지 위기를 글로벌 기후 위기를 극복할 수 있는 길이라는 점을 천명한 바가 있습니다. 그런 제주도의 지방 외교 정책에 이제는 우리 정부도 그리고 일본도 많은 나라들과 도시들이 전면적으로 나서고 있고 또 그러한 흐름에 배를 같이 해주고 있다고 생각합니다. 특히 오늘 미 국무부의 지방외교 정책에 대해서 언급이 있겠지만 어느 나라도 지방외교를 등한시할 수 없는 상황에 있다고 생각합니다. 오늘 일본의 도쿠시마 현과 같이 저희들이 협약을 체결하는 것도 지방외교의 장을 새롭게 열겠다는 겁니다. 한일중 정상회의의 후속 조치로 우리는 제주도와 대한민국의 제주 그리고 일본의 오키나와 그리고 중국의 하이난이 함께 연대 협력 협의체를 만들기로 하고 다시 한번 11월 달에 이것을 구체적으로 논의하기 위해서 오키나와에서 다시 회동하기로 약속한 바가 있습니다. 이러는 과정에서 제주는 새롭게 도약하고자 합니다. 에너지 대전환을 통해서 탄소 중립과 녹색 성장이라는 두 가지 축으로 새롭게 도약하고자 합니다. 그런 과정에서 글로벌 도시들과 주변 도시들과 국가들과 함께 연대하고 협력할 수 있는 방안을 모색하고자 합니다. 제주가 가는 새로운 길에 세계의 많은 도시들이 함께해 주기를 바랍니다. 그리고 또 오늘 패널로 참여해 주시는 여러분들께서 이와 같은 제주의 지방외교 정책에 힘을 실어주시고 더 구체적으로 연대하고 협력할 수 있는 방안을 함께 논의해 주시기를 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Governor Oh, for your insightful remarks and for your unwavering commitment to global understanding and cooperation. We are very fortunate to have with us this afternoon an outstanding panel to take stock and look ahead at subnational diplomacy. Beginning from my immediate left, our panelists are Governor Kododa of Tokushima Prefecture in Japan, Professor Mary Alice Haddad, Professor of Government at Wesleyan University in the United States, Ambassador Yeonju Ko, formerly Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in Washington, and currently Ambassador of International Relations here in Jeju Special Self-Governing Province, Christian Muslechner, former Mayor of Vilnius, Austria, and Manish Singh, Principal with the Sunstone Strategy Group based in Washington. I will now pose the first set of questions that we are going to ask each of the panelists to respond to in the impossible time constraint of 5 minutes or less. The first set of questions begins, in your professional experience, how do you view the potential of subnational diplomacy? What factors contribute to its growing importance? Can you share specific examples of successful subnational diplomacy practices that can be emulated? We will begin with Governor Gotoda.
はい、ありがとうございます。まず今日このチェジュの皆様方に大変な歓迎をいただき、そしてまたこの素晴らしい、まさに地方外交の先進的なこのチェジュ特別道でですね、このようなフォーラムが開催されることを本当に必然であり素晴らしいことだと思ってます。感謝申し上げたいと思います。で今まさにチェアマンのラティフさんからのご質問でございますが、私は実は国会議員を22年しておりまして、そして、昨年知事になってまだ1年しか経っておりませんが、常々思っていたのが、インターナショナルっていうのはいわゆるビトゥインネーション&ネーションですけど、我々はこれからインターローカルの時代だと。ビトゥインローカル&ローカル、ローカルそしてまた草の根のですね、外交こそが時として国同士の紛争、そしてまた難しい問題を解決する原動力だと思っています。そのためにもですね、やはり地方から積極的に開かれた外交をしなきゃいけない。まさにチェジュ道のまさに大使のような方がですね、いわゆる地方の自治体におられるということは本当に素晴らしいことだと思ってます。学びたいと思います。私も就任以来もう各国の大使にまずご挨拶に、日本にある駐日大使にご挨拶に行ってですね、外交のスタートをさせていただきたいということで伺っております。で、私も就任以来海外にしょっちゅう邪魔させていただいておりますが、今後我々はですね、まず先頭に立って知事が、いわゆる4分知事のようにですね、先頭に立って知事が前に進むこと、そして我々がいかに無知であることを知るっていうことが私ども政治をやる者、行政をやる者のもう一丁目一番地、一番大切なことだと思ってます。そしてとにかく動くこと、動かなければ進まない。もちろんCOVID-19 があったわけでありますが、それ以上に我々はいわゆる知事、そしてまたそういう立場の人間がやっていく。残念ながら日本はパスポートの取得率が実は 17% になってます。アジアでは韓国、台湾は 60%。これについて去年岸田総理にも何度もこの状況は非常に危険であると、もっともっと若い人からしっかりと外交をやるべく旗を振っていただきたいと、こういう話をさせていただいたところでございます。そういう意味で我々は地方から外交をもう一回立て直していく可能性と、そして挑戦をしっかりしてまいりたいと、このように思います。
Thank you very much, Governor Gotoda. And now we're going to invite the Deputy Chief of Mission with the Embassy of Japan in Seoul to make some congratulatory remarks.
皆様こんにちは。在大韓民国日本国大使館で、次席総括講師をやっております三林大輔と申します。今般チェジュフォーラム特別セッショングローバル協力の灯火としての地方外交の開催にあたり、一言祝辞を申し上げます。チェジュフォーラムは2001年以来、内外の要路、有識者の参加を得て、地域の平和と安定のための忌憚のない意見交換の場を提供するとともに、国際交流の重要な機会となってまいりました。本フォーラムの発展に尽力してこられたチェジュ平和研究所、チェジュ特別自治道関係者の皆様の努力に敬意を表するものであります。このセッションでは、国際的な緊張がある中でも、より良い世の中のための連帯と協力を継続するため、地方外交の役割と重要性に焦点を当て、国際的な専門家の方々を招いて議論する非常に有益なセッションとなっていると承知しております。日本国外務省は、地方自治体等を重要なパートナーであると位置づけており、地方との連携を推進することで、オールジャパンの総合的な外交力の強化というものを目指しております。そのさまざまな取り組みは、外務省のホームページ内での外交青書や、グローカル外交ネットというのがあるんですけど、そのページでご覧いただけます。一例を挙げますとですね、外務省は外務大臣と地方自治体の首長との共催で、駐日の外交団の皆様などを招いて、各地方の食品、地酒、伝統工芸品、伝統舞踊、音楽などの地方の魅力を体験する機会を設けております。今年の3月にはですね、上川外務大臣、そして本日パネリストとしてご登壇されている後藤田正純徳島県知事による共催で、SDGs 先進県徳島を世界へ発信するレセプションというものを実施いたしました。このレセプションにはですね、駐日韓国大使館をはじめとする駐日外交団、駐日外国商工会議所、企業関係者、徳島関係国会議員ほか、約230名の方々が参加されてですね、非常な盛況であったというふうに聞いております。外務省はこうした行事をこれまで25回開催してまいりました。次に日韓関係について申し上げますと、日韓関係は政府、国民レベルで交流が活発化し、この交流は地方にまで広がっております。新型コロナの収束に伴って、韓国と日本の地方都市を結ぶ直行便が次々と再開されてですね、両国の往来者数は昨年約927万人まで大幅に増加いたしました。今や日本を訪れる韓国の方の訪問先は、東京、大阪といった大都市だけではなく、さまざまな地方にある都市、温泉、旅館へと広がっています。他方ですね、多くの日本人が韓国映画のドラマのロケ地を訪問するために、韓国の地方都市を訪問しておりですね、チェジュは日本で非常に有名な俳優のイ・ビョンホンさんと女優のキム・テギさんが主演したドラマのアイリスなどですね、さまざまな撮影のロケ地としても日本人が訪れたい、自然とリゾートが魅力的な観光地となっております。また世界遺産に登録されたハッラ山やみかん、黒豚といったおいしい食材などチェジュの魅力は計り知れません。地方外交の活発化は異なる国との相互理解の拡大を意味します。1988年、ちょっと昔ですけれども、 の日本の外交青書には次のような記述があります。ちなみにこの年は韓国がソウルオリンピックを開催した年ですけれども、そこにどのようにあるかというと、相互理解は国際社会が安定的、友好的に発展していくための基礎である。政治的、経済的な関係は相互の国民の間の広範な分野での交流と理解が伴って初めて強固なものとなる。国民全体のレベルでの相互理解がない場合には、些細な政治問題も過剰な反応を引き起こすことは多くの事例が示している。このようにあります。このようにですね、当時からも相互理解が国際社会の友好に必要であるというふうに考えられており、現在は地方外交がそれに大きく貢献してくださる時代となっていると言えるかと思います。最後になりますけれども、改めまして主催者、登壇者および会場にてご参加の皆様への敬意を表するとともに、地方外交が2024年第19回諸事フォーラムのテーマであるより良い世界のための協力の発展に寄与することを期待いたしまして、開会の祝辞とさせていただきます。ご清聴どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. And Governor Gotoda would like to continue with his presentation.
ありがとうございます。先ほどに続いて、私からショートスピーチさせていただきたいと思います。先ほど冒頭のご挨拶に続きまして、資料をぜひご覧いただきたいと思います。まず徳島県はですね、いわゆるチェジュ島特別知事、特別区とですね、県と一緒のいわゆるナチュラル、そしてサステナブル、そして、スピリチュアルと、この3つのですね、特徴を持った県でございます。特に韓国と日本はですね、先ほど4分知事もお話あった通り、少子化、また高齢化、さまざまな課題を共有しております。そしてまた歴史的に言えばですね、先ほどもお話あった大阪との関係、そして東アジアの安定を考えたときに、まさにチェジュと沖縄が果たす役割っていうのは非常に大きいと、このように思ってますが、私も22年国会議員をやっておりましたが、今知事としてですね、まさに地方から日本を変えていく、地方から世界をつなげていく、こういったことをやろうと思ってます。でやはり人口が増えている、世界は人口が増えてますが、人口が減る、そしてまた少子化、高齢化が進んでいる、こういった課題を解決するためには、やはり1人当たりの生産性を上げるしかございません。そしてサステナブルなまさに地球環境に優しいそういったものを先進的に取り組んでいかなければいけません。また外交的にもですね、外に向かっていかなければいけません。そういう意味でもチェジュのですね取り組みっていうのは非常にこれは世界的に参考になると思っています。私どももですね、徳島としてですね、まさにナチュラル、ヒストリカル、サステナブルということで発信しております。一つには例えば神山という町、上勝という町は本当に高齢化した地方の山の中でございます。徳島県は7割が山でございますが、その中でも80歳のお年寄りが実は葉っぱを取ってですね、これを高級日本料理店のお皿の上に並べるという、こういったことをお年寄りたちが頑張っておられて、80歳のお年寄りが iPad を使いこなすと、こういうことが非常に日本でも注目され、また神山タウンという左のところでございますが、ここも本当に人口が3000人ぐらいしかいない町でありますが、ここにいわゆる高等専門学校が来てですね、ハイスペックな経営者が教えに来ると。そしてまさにギフテッド、天才、そういった方々、子どもたちが集まる、世界中から集まって、まさに、新しいビジネスを生む環境をこの地方、山の中でやっていると、こういったこともですね、今後大きな発信材料になるんじゃないかなと思います。そして徳島県は実は女性の活躍も非常に盛んでありまして、 いわゆる人口当たりの女性の社長の数が日本で一番高いです。そしてまた徳島県における県のですね、行政組織のさまざまな委員会のメンバーの女性比率も日本で一番高い。そして日本の場合はですね、どうしても男性の方が大学に進学する率が多いんですけれども、徳島は女性の方が男性を上回ると、こういうことで先ほど申し上げました高齢者もそして女性も活躍する、こういったサステナブルな、またSDGs 含めてさまざまな挑戦をさせていただいているところでございます。で次でございますけれども、これについてはですね、また改めて世界とつながる徳島ということで、韓国の皆様方ともですね、大学を通じた交流、そして留学生、そしてまた LED、ノーベル賞を受賞した日夜科学で有名ノーベル賞を受賞した LED で有名な日夜科学さんの会社がソウルにあったり、大塚製薬さんという2兆円企業がまたソウルにもあったりですね、そしてまたコンテナの定期航路がですね、プサンと徳島の小松島というところとつながっているということで、ただまだまだこれからポテンシャルはたくさんございますので、これをどんどん広げていきたいと思います。で次に、今回私がチェジュにお招きをいただいたきっかけがですね、まさに先ほども一緒にお話しさせていただきましたが、韓国の行政長官イ・サンミン長官が去年徳島にお越しになりました。これはやっぱり非常に象徴的なことでですね、いわゆる行政長官、すなわち地方政治を総括する大臣がですね、まさに日本に来て日本の地方を学んで、そして日本の地方と韓国の地方をつなげるという、こういったことを先進的にやられるということが素晴らしいことだと思います。日本の総務大臣、地方の大臣でこういったことをしたことのある大臣は見たことありません。ぜひこういったものがですね、世界中で広がっていくと嬉しいなと、このように思っております。で私も就任以来ユン大使やさまざまな国の大使にもですねお会いして、地方外交が一番大事なんだと、インターローカルが大事だと、こんなお話もさせていただいているところでございます。で徳島につきましてですね、それ以外にも、韓国のロッテさんが日本に大変シンパシーがあります。ロッテの中でもですね、東京にある免税店、インバウンドのお客さん向けのお店でもですね、これも今までは海外のブランド、いわゆるフランスやパリ、アメリカ、いろんなものを売ってたんですけど、やっぱり日本の工芸品、日本の歴史あるものを置いた方がいいんじゃないかと、こういうご提案をしたところですね、まさにインバウンドの観光客が日本でロッテの免税店でさまざまな都道府県のいいものを見ていただく、買っていただく、こういう今挑戦もさせていただいているところでございます。加えまして、これはスポーツ交流もですね、実は昨年韓国と日韓青少年のスポーツ交流もさせていただき、また音楽交流等々も今進めさせていただいております。でこれは先ほども三林さんからもお話あった通り、上川大臣と私が共催して80カ国の大使を呼んだ、こういった地方をしっかり世界に知っていただく、こういう活動も日本でさせていただいていると、こういうところでございます。でタイの方にも行って、毎年私どもは国際消費者フォーラムというのを徳島でやっておりまして、日本の消費者庁の外局が徳島県に存在するということで、こういったこともやらせていただいているところでございます。でまたこれ海外のプロモーションで、フランスにも今パリのオリンピックがある中で、他の県と協力してパリの中心部に日本の発信拠点をつい先月、オープンさせていただいたと、こういうところでございます。もう時間もないんで、徳島県といえば阿波踊り、400年続く阿波の徳島の伝統的なですね、ダンス、こういったこともですね、しっかり世界に発信して いこうということで、今年もタイのジャパンエキスポで、披露させていただき、先日はニューヨークでも、日本のですね阿波踊り、徳島の阿波踊りを発信させていただいたところでございます。これは先ほど申し上げました、日本の課題は、パスポート取得率が非常に低いということ、これをですねしっかり地方から盛り上げていかなきゃいけないと思いました。国っていうのはやっぱり私も国会議員やってて思いますが、非常に現場リアルフィールドから遠い、やはり今まさにリアルなフィールドに近いですね、地方行政やる中で多くの方にこういったことを発信させていただいているということです。で、私どもも積極的にチェジュの皆さんに学んでですね、来年はもちろん皆さん大阪の万博がございますが、大阪から1時間半で徳島には来れます。まさに周遊観光、大阪に来て日本のまさにアナザーシティ、アナザーガバメントを回っていただくというプロモーションもそうですが、来年ISTS という国際宇宙博覧会というのを徳島でやることが決定しております。また同時に日本におけるですね食の大会、食の祭典を徳島で農林水産省と共催でやる予定にしておりまして、そこではまさにフードダイバーシティ、そしてまたフードセーフティー、そしてまた、いわゆるフードセキュリティ、さまざまなテーマでですね、これから世界の方々と学んでいきたいと、このように思っているところでございます。ぜひまた皆様方と共にですね、これから素晴らしい地方、そしてインターナショナルからインターローカルの時代に向けて、我々もチェジュとの MOU を目指して、これからもしっかり前に進めてまいりたいとこのように思っておりますので、ぜひこれからも世界に出ていく徳島をよろしくお願いを申し上げます。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Governor Tododa. We're now going to turn to Professor Haddad.
Thank you very much. So we were given some questions, and they had to do with what is the potential of subnational diplomacy, and give some examples of how it works. So from my perspective, I think the potential for subnational diplomacy is enormous. When you look around, we're at the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity, and for those of you who've been attending for several days, there was a lot of like war and not so much prosperity happening when the national leaders were talking. And when the local leaders are talking, the subnational leaders are talking, they're talking about peace and prosperity. And they're solving real problems: climate change, energy, women's issues. And they solve those problems in their local communities because they are forced to. And they collaborate with each other. As one of the speakers at an earlier panel today said, nobody has an army. Jeju isn't going to go and invade Okinawa because it gets mad at Okinawa, right? And so the modes of collaboration must be peaceful, and they're always productive. So I'll give you one example, or the example that started me to be interested in this topic of subnational diplomacy. I was in Kitakyushu, which is a small-ish, big-ish, medium-ish town, not so far from Governor's prefecture. And I was at a conference of subnational leaders. So these were local leaders that were sharing stories with each other about how to do various local issues better. And one of the stories that really caught me was a story of Surabaya, which is a city in Indonesia. And in 2001, its landfill was getting full. And so they called up their sister city, Kitakyushu, and said, "Oh, we're having trouble with our landfill. Got any ideas?" And so Kitakyushu said, "Yeah, I think we can come up with some ideas." And so they worked with a local NGO, a Japanese NGO, and commissioned a researcher that was at a Japanese institution. And they came up with a composting method to do better at composting at home. And so then the NGO worked with the Kichikyushu government and the Surabaya government and a local women-run NGO in Surabaya to sort of pilot the composting method. And they trained some women to do this. And then it worked in one neighborhood, and then worked in 3 neighborhoods, and it worked in 6 neighborhoods, and then worked in a couple towns. And then in the first 5 years, Surabaya reduced its municipal solid waste by 30%, created 75 new jobs, and increased its green space by 10%. So this might not sound like a lot, but it's enormous. Tens of thousands of tons of waste are no longer causing health problems in the area. You've got beautiful green public space. You don't have big dumping grounds. So this worked great in Surabaya. So then it spread to some other cities out in Indonesia. Then there was this network of Southeast Asian cities. So then by 2011, we had 15 Southeast Asian cities. By 2018, you had 30 cities across the globe, including Latin America and Africa, using the same composting method. Municipal solid waste is a real issue. All of you produce it. All of the places where you live have to deal with it. And so these are real issues that are solved by local communities, and by the translocal collaborations, they can work across national boundaries. One of the earlier panels on what the global north can learn from the global south, and His Excellency, an ambassador from India to Korea, shared that a lot of the solutions from the global north don't work in the global south. The reverse is usually not true. So the solutions that work in the global south usually do work in the global north, because they're usually cheaper and easier and more effective, and often more grassroots based. And so why is subnational diplomacy so successful? It's successful because it works. You have, we were hearing, everybody at this forum has been so excited about the trilateral summit between Japan and Korea and China, and we can all be very excited about that. That's just great. But 4 years, really? 4 years it took to get them together? Okinawa, Hainan, Jeju, they're hanging out all the time. They're not waiting 4 years because somebody got worked up about something. They're solving their real problems. They're figuring out what they can work together. If they have a good idea, so if our governor from Tokushima talks to Governor O and says, oh, you know, the next hour or so, he says, oh, I know what we should do. We should have an eco ferry, eco tour that goes straight from Tokushima over to Jeju. Let's do that. And Governor O says, great, yes, let's do that. And then they can just, do it. It's not going to take 15 years to get it done. Or one of them could say, actually not such a great idea. And nobody goes to war. There's no problem. It just doesn't happen. And then later on, when somebody has a good idea of a youth golf, multi-island golf tournament or something, they'll pick up the phone. And the other side will also pick up the phone. These lines of communication don't stop because of all these political things that are going on at the national level. So what are the factors that are helping it improve and get bigger? Because it is growing dramatically. The failure at the national level, as I've mentioned, it's sort of stymied at the global level. And so issues like climate change, if they can't get their act together, local governments don't have the option of sort of pushing it off. They got to deal with it right now. So part of it's a governance failure at upper levels of government. Some of it has to do with communication technology. Many of you are listening to me with simultaneous translation. Google Translate works pretty well. You can do live free video calls. I have spoken on live free video calls. It makes it a lot easier. So even if you can't talk in person, you're able to talk virtually. Or if you meet in person at this conference, you can keep those relationships live afterwards. And then finally, it works. These governments are actually solving real problems, whether it's municipal solid waste or climate change or transportation networks. I've got a research project that talks about how cities that engage in international diplomacy, so city diplomacy, can generate more trade and foreign investment in their city. So it actually makes money for a city, which is often a sort of a red line. It's lovely to have high school exchanges and music and cultural products and higher tourism, but if you can actually demonstrate to your constituents that you are flying off to Jeju, actually will generate more money for your town, that's a real win. So I'll close it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Ambassador Ko.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think that just listening to two speakers, then I found out that one more else I can add for subnational diplomacy. Tokushima governor talked about their own subnational diplomacy with other countries, including Korea. And Professor Haddad talking about why subnational diplomacy is important. For me, I'm trying to tell about the kind of mixture of the theory and the practice, because I have been working for the foreign affairs industry more than 29 years. And among 29 years, only 1.5 years engaged in the subnational diplomacy as I work as Jeju's ambassador for international relations. So based on my very short period experience, I can by myself summarize kind of the angles for subnational diplomacy. One angle is that subnational diplomacy plays very important role in achieving local government policy agenda. And the other one is that because of current international political environment dictated by the geopolitical competition between United States and China, make every country is difficult for working together for global agenda, such as fighting against climate change and developmental assistance and response to energy and food crisis. So that those are the lack of diplomacy and international cooperation because of the current environment, political environment, make subnational diplomacy important. Because subnational diplomacy does care about the geopolitics, but not that much like national diplomacy. National government, national country, they are responsible for national security. So they are very keen and they are very sensitive to geopolitics. For subnational, the level of government, their very important function is the improvement of the local residents' welfare. So socio-economic interest of the residents is very important. So they are not that much sensitive to geopolitics. So they are easily working together for the betterment of their local community. So that I think there, because of lack of the international cooperation between national level, make force the subnational level of diplomacy important to bring in cooperation among nations. So these two things are like local government policy agenda achievement and international environment make subnational become really important. So that's my the understanding why I'm doing subnational diplomacy for around 2 years. And one good example for subnational diplomacy I can find from my experience is that there is a under two coalition. This is an association for more than 170 local governments over the world for addressing climate change. So they set up their goal, working for the fighting against the climate change. They are moving faster than national cooperation. For example, Jeju joined the under two coalition so that Jeju set up their own strategy for carbon net zero. That is set up the target year is by 2035, but Korea's national level commitment by 2050. So 15 years faster than national commitment. So that Jeju is leading the carbon neutrality area of cooperation with the international level. So those are the examples the subnational diplomacy can play a leading role, even bringing in international cooperation for the areas of global agenda that now the international environment is really hard to move forward. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ko. We're now going to turn to Christian Muslechner.
Very much. It is a great pleasure being here in this beautiful location, taking part at Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. The question is about the personal, professional experience with local diplomacy or sub-national diplomacy. And this is the reason why I have to kind of tell you why I'm here sitting. I come from Austria. In Europe, Austria is a member of the European Union. Austria is a federal republic, and this federal republic has a system, an administrative and political system, a three-layered one. There is the top level, which is the federal level, and then there's the mid-layer. And in this mid-layer, there are 9 counties who make up the Austrian Republic, and the lowest layer is the municipalities, the cities and the towns, where, for example, the 2 top layers, they have all the legislative powers. On the lowest level, they do not exist. But what do the lowest level have? It has a certain amount of independence in making their decision, what to work on, and so on. In my earlier role as a mayor of a small municipality, I learned that intensive cooperation is the forward possibility for sub-governmental diplomacy. Again, I want to really point that out. It is intensive cooperation with others, getting in contact with neighboring areas, counties, whatsoever. On this level, something can be achieved, or big things can be achieved. And again, going back to this lowest level which we have in Austria of administration, I learned as a politician that states and nations, and we've heard that yesterday and the day before, even from His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, nations are too small to solve international problems. Even the European Union is too small to solve international problems. Even the United States on their own, they all cannot do it. And on the other hand, governments, local governments, for example, the Austrian government, they are, on the other hand, can be too big to address specific local problems. So there is a dilemma. On one hand, they're too small to achieve the big things. On the other hand, they can be too big in order to look after what is needed on a smaller scale. And this is where, for me, subnational diplomacy very strongly comes into the picture. This is where this is the playing field. These are the gaps which open between this too big and this too small at the same time. I brought two examples, or we were asked to bring examples of good subnational diplomatic efforts. And I want to start with a project that is, it's not a project anymore. It has been awarded the title 5-country UNESCO Biosphere Park along the rivers Mura, Drava and Danube. Most likely you've heard the name Danube before. The other two rivers you certainly or most certainly will not know. And it is a water protection project, and this project spans 5 nations. And this is maybe also, if you're Korean, it's not so you're not so used to that. In Europe, you have all these small there are a few big nations, but most of the 27 nations are rather small, with a few million inhabitants. For example, the capital, Seoul of Korea, has more inhabitants than entire Austria. And so they are very close together and they have to work together. And this is very much liked by the European Union. That there are even programs laid up every 7 years where regions, Europe is made up of more than 200 regions, work together, and these regions often overlap national borders because the situation in Europe is as it is. Anyway, this biosphere water protection area, which was formed, covers 5 countries and 17 institutions are involved in that. It started, the works on it started more than 20 years ago, and now last year it has been awarded the title UNESCO Biospheric Park. 5 nations, 17 institutions. Obviously, this project has started a long time ago, and it has started from grassroots. It has maybe started even from individuals who came up with the idea. As Professor Hadid said, they called each other then on the normal phone, not on a cell phone, most likely, and they said, oh, let's do that and let's work together. I also want to tell you, in the 5 nations, I start with my home country, is Austria, then Hungary, then Slovenia, the next one is Croatia, and the 5th one is Serbia. And taking into consideration that 30 years ago, Serbia fought a very bitter war with Slovenia and Croatia, you cannot, so the effects and the value of subnational diplomacy by no means can be overstated. I brought a second example, and this is the example why I have to say thank you to Ambassador Ko, because you persistently told me that I have to come and that I can present it. It is a project which I started with a mayor colleague of mine from a neighboring region. We started talking in 2022, and in 23 we started it, we founded it, and it's called the Dachstein Dialogue Festival for Tolerance. It's a long name, hard to understand, but what is important in it, it's dialogue and it's tolerance in it. 2024 in September we will have our first soft opening with 3 days of festival, and although we are rather small still, we have excellent speakers and we have a big interest from abroad for people to come. And what triggered us to do so? This mayor I mentioned earlier, he's a good friend of mine, and we became more and more depressed about the rising amount of intolerance in our society. We in Europe, in Austria, things like the rule of law is getting questioned. That is just outstanding. The society is split very much into extremes. And coming back to the European situation, we are 27 nations within the European Union now that UK is no longer a member of it. And such strange ideas via democracies, and you also could say, well, forget it, it's a strange idea, don't want to hear it, very left, very right. No, that's not good. We have to discuss it, and you have that in the European Union 27-fold, because you have those extremes in every country, and they make up a situation and a mood that we didn't like. And that's why my mayor friend and I decided to found the Dachstein Dialogues. And we are hoping to be in contact with the Jeju Forum also in the future, because Jeju Forum on peace and better living very much, we do very much the same. And so that are my two examples. If you want to learn more about it, we can talk later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Manisha Singh, please.
Thank you so much. Is my microphone on? There we go. Okay. I also want to start by thanking the Jeju Forum, Governor O and Ambassador Ko, for the wonderful invitation to be here and just experience this great forum for the last several days. I would very much echo the comments of the other panelists here today. I think that subnational diplomacy is such an important and critical factor in forming diplomatic relationships today. We all know of the conflict at the national level, and I think that local and regional officials can really serve to build broader national relationships from a very sustainable perspective. Now, my last position at the U.S. State Department was the Assistant Secretary for Economic and Business Affairs. Therefore, I thought I would focus on subnational diplomacy in the economic context. We all know that economic and trade relationships are usually managed at the national, international, or even the multinational level. However, I think when we operationalize these economic relationships, the truest and most deepest effects are often at the regional and local levels. I'll start with an example from my home state of Florida. Although I live in Washington, D.C., I grew up in Florida, and I always claim Florida as my home state. Last year, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, traveled here to South Korea. Well, not here necessarily, to Jeju, and hopefully he will get to Jeju at some point in the future, but traveled to Korea to form economic relationships. The bilateral trade between the state of Florida and the nation of Korea is $1.3 billion. That makes the state of Florida Korea's 7th largest trading partner. So not at all an insignificant economic relationship. While Governor DeSantis was here, he signed an MOU with a Korean company to develop clean technology in the state of Florida. And this was critically important because it provides an economic bridge, an economic relationship. It serves to solve an important issue for both the U.S. and Korea, and that's environmental benefits. So this is an example of what can happen when a governor comes and forms a relationship at different levels in a different country. These trade delegations from the states are getting to be very popular. You will see state governors go to European countries, to Asian countries to form relationships. And as the panelists have previously mentioned, because there's often a great level of turmoil at the national level, at the state level, we can actually accomplish something. We can have these MOUs that move the ball forward, that provide economic benefits on both sides of the equation. Turning to a very personal example for me, as I mentioned, in my position at the State Department, I handled economic policy for the U.S. government. One of the things that was very important to me was women's economic empowerment. I wanted to create a platform that would help women around the world form their own companies, get their enterprises funded through startup funding, venture capital funding. So the program that I created was called POWER, Providing Opportunities for Women's Economic Rise. And I'm happy to say that POWER persists even after I left the State Department. So this platform was, of course, enacted at the national level. The funding was through the U.S. State Department. However, if you look at the operationalization of the relationships, it happened very much at the local level. For instance, I was visited by local officials from the city of San Diego in California, including the mayor of San Diego, and they wanted to find out how they could play a greater role in U.S. economic relations. So I told them about the POWER program. And we had officials at the U.S. consulate in the city of Tijuana in Mexico who also wanted to work with women entrepreneurs. So under the POWER program, we created this partnership between the city of Tijuana and the city of San Diego to help women entrepreneurs in both cities take advantage of the benefits of the newly passed U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement to be able to sell their products across the border. It was very successful. Most of these women-owned enterprises are also SMEs or small and medium-sized enterprises that employ very local people. So this, for me, was a great example of how subnational diplomacy accomplished something very real and very tangible that benefited women entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized enterprises through city connections, which are still going on. So again, I would echo the comments of all the panelists here on why I think subnational diplomacy is no longer just something to look at as a side effect or something as an issue which is not critically important to the broader dialogues. I truly think that these conversations will benefit broader national relationships.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to a second basket of questions and do a lightning round so that we can go back to the audience for Q&A. The second questions begins with how can local governments enhance their subnational diplomacy efforts? Who are the key partners local governments should engage with when crafting and executing their international strategies? What emerging trends and factors will shape the future landscape of subnational diplomacy? Maybe we can start with the governor.
はい、ありがとうございます。私は今この場で言えば実質現場で知事という立場で仕事をしている立場で申し上げたいと思いますが、本当先ほど来皆さんのご意見の通りで、やはりもう地方がもう国を動かすもう時代になっているとこのように思います。で、私もなぜ国会からいわゆる知事になろうと思ったかというと、やはり国のいろんな制度をですね、法律として作ってもなかなかその現場でそれが実現されないという、こういうもどかしさです。先ほど新さんからもあったようにアメリカの女性活躍のお話ありましたが、私アメリカではタイトル9という法律が素晴らしい法律だと思ってます。法律が機能していると思ってましたけど、しかしさらに地方レベルでやらなければ できないという、これはもう世界中でも同じです。で、国会議員が作る法律予算がやっぱり現場でいかに理解され、いかにそれが使われるかっていうのが本当に大きな課題だと思ってます。ですから地方はこれから今日は地方外交の可能性ということでありますが、より地方は能力を上げていかなきゃいけない、生産性を上げていかなきゃいけない、そして経験知見を積んでいかなきゃいけない、これが一番我々の課題だと思ってて、まさに外務省からこの地方自治体に大使として来られたっていうこの韓国のチェジュの取り組みは素晴らしくて、先ほども今日こちらの総領事、日本の総領事で外務省から来てる人間、総務省から来てる人間いますけど、やっぱり総務省の人間、地方行政やってる人たちは外交は外務省のやることだと。で、外務省の人たちもいや地方は外交は無理でしょ、難しいですよねっていう、こういう感覚がいまだにありますので、それを本当ブレイクスルーしていく取り組みとしてですね、私もこれからチェジュ特別道のですね取り組みをMOU を通じて、まさにアジアからですね地方外交の可能性はまさにインフィニティであると、無限大であるということを示していきたいなと改めて感じました。
Professor Haddad.
Thank you. I think I'm going to be echoing some of the comments that others have been speaking about, but talking about how governments can enhance their international diplomacy, the subnational governments, what they can do. I mentioned earlier that I've recently done a study looking at subnational diplomacy, particularly city diplomacy, and how it can use city diplomacy to enhance its foreign direct investment and trade. And I was looking at 3 measures of city diplomacy, and one was whether or not your city hosts a foreign consulate, whether your city engages in sister cities or how many sister friendship twin cities you have, and then whether or not your city joins any of the international city networks. Those were sort of my 3 measures that I tracked. And to my surprise, I was hoping that those 3 things actually mattered, and they do matter. But the thing that was surprising to me was how much foreign consulates mattered. It turns out that foreign consulates mattered more than even the size of the population in a city in terms of the level of trade. In fact, my study was looking at the top the 100 largest U.S. metro areas over a 15, 20 year period. And according to the model, when a city added its first consulate, it could double its exports. And another really interesting finding that emerged was global cities are global cities. They're already involved in all this stuff. And it's true, Seoul in particular had a very city diplomacy focused mayor, and sort of there's a institute of city diplomacy in Seoul and lots of interesting things happening in Seoul. But the cities that benefited the most were those big but not really big cities. Places like Jeju, Okinawa, Toledo, Cleveland, Seattle, not New York. New York's already doing great. LA also doing great. Adding one more consulate to New York, it's already got a gazillion consulates, so one more doesn't make that much of a difference. But if you're a small or medium-sized city, it can make a really big difference to join a city network, to add a new sister city, to attract a foreign government to open a consulate in your town. Who are the key partners? One of the things that I find really exciting about subnational diplomacy is how relatively easily it engages in multi-stakeholder engagement. It's much easier than at the national level to have a wide range of different actors. So mayors are usually totally critical. If you're a big enough city to have, like Jeju does, sort of dedicated staff who work on international diplomacy. That can be super helpful. NGOs that are working in international affairs or subnational diplomatic activity, those can be very important. Universities are very important partners. They can often partner with the city to form sort of the first set of international relations activities in other cities. Universities often have study abroad programs or foreign exchange programs that can help supply the kind of administrative activities and staff and support that you need to kind of nurture a sister city or a foreign exchange program with another local organization. For-profit companies that are international can form these relationships. As Ms. Singh was talking about, foreign companies that come and invest in your city can then help form relationships going the other direction. So if you have Korean firms that come into your U.S. city can then make relationships with the Korean firms and vice versa. And the last sort of things I wanted to mention were what were some emerging trends. I see three in particular. The first one, as is indicated here, is it's growing. So subnational diplomacy is growing for all the reasons that we've talked about. The variation, the topic areas, the types of cities, the geographic scope, it's growing pretty much on all levels. The use of MOUs, they've been talked about a couple times. It used to be that was mostly sister cities or sort of informal relationships. More and more subnational units are finding MOUs to be a very handy tool that helps focus the relationship. It can create a kind of event-focused or a partnership-based, and the MOU can serve as a launching point for other things. And it forces all the sides to kind of be accountable to their aspirations and set target goals for what it is that they want to accomplish. Another trend that we are also seeing on this panel is national government involvement. Some governments, like the Korean government, is very savvy and has been doing this for a long time, as with the Japanese central government. The foreign affairs of the Foreign Ministry of Korea has formal MOUs with several cities and provinces in Korea, where they, like Ambassador Oh, might come from the foreign ministry, come to a local government, and the local government can benefit from the diplomatic experience of the foreign ministries. There's not that many governments that do that, but even just last month, Korean's Ministry of Foreign Affairs signed a new MOU with the Governors Association to try to enhance that activity, where the foreign ministry would give more guidance and support to governors and subnational units that are interested in getting engaged. The U.S. government has been a little bit behind in this area, but formed a subnational diplomacy unit just 2 years ago. And now now local governments in the United States, which have been engaged in subnational diplomacy for a long time, now actually have a place to go in the State Department when they have a question or want some support. So we do see an increasing trend where national governments are providing more support to subnational governments. I can't totally tell if this is a good thing. So far, it looks good. My research, it suggests that's all possible. But as we've talked about, one of the big benefits of subnational diplomacy is that they don't get tangled into the politics of the national central government. And so I do hope that continues. The last thing that I'll mention was not on my notes, but a few of the speakers have mentioned women's empowerment and gender. And you might not notice this, but I am sitting up here looking out at you, and the audience for this session looks very different than the audience at all the other sessions at this Jeju Forum. If you look around, there are a lot more women in this session. Almost all the other sessions that I've been to is like a sea of blue suits, and with an occasional 10 men and then one woman, and then 10 men and then one woman. But I actually see there are a bunch of you where it's like 3 women in a row looking out from here. So I think that's one of the other really exciting areas of subnational diplomacy. It is a place where women take the lead, have the lead, take empowering roles, and can pass that on and share with others. Thank you.
We're very fortunate today to have several very senior diplomats from the Foreign Service of the Republic of Korea. Ambassador Ko, I can personally attest to the fact that he was a very effective representative of your country in the United States, both in the consulate in New York and as the DCM in Washington. And we're also very fortunate to have with us today a former Consul General of the Republic of Korea in New York, Ambassador Chung, who's with us. With that, maybe Ambassador Ko, you'd like to say more about the importance of the consulate and the embassy in partnering with subnational organizations.
Yes, I also talk about that element as well, but I'd like to start with the importance of the specific characteristics of the subnational government. So subnational government, I think, overall of all the local governments, the forms of subnational diplomacy and specific contents of subnational diplomacy will be different each other. I think the subnational diplomacy, I see subnational diplomacy as a tool to achieve local government political goal. For example, in the case of Jeju, Jeju is isolated island, so the connectivity is a really important policy agenda. And also Jeju has environmental and social value for environment, so carbon-free island by 2030, and net zero 2035, and plastic zero 2040. So those kind of policy agenda is set up. So all the policy agenda, there should be some tool to achieve that goal. There are many tools, as you know. Spending is one of them, or legislating in the local assembly, and also international cooperation by subnational diplomacy, also one of the tools to achieve such a political goal, policy goal. So Jeju policy goal and the other like Chungnam and Florida's state policy goal will be different. So the contents of subnational diplomacy depends on the identity of the local government. That is my point. So the partners, how to work with the partners to enhance subnational diplomacy depends on that identity of a local community. So for Jeju, like connectivity is important. So tourist industry and some trade-related industries, those are very important stakeholders. So enhance subnational diplomacy for Jeju, those stakeholders of the tourist industry and agricultural exporting industries, and those are the very important partners. Also, Jeju has specific social characteristics that because Jeju has suffered from tragic April 3rd incidents, so that Jeju residents has a strong sentiment on peace and human rights. So those kind of things are specific identity of Jeju local government. So those promoting global peace and human rights also one of the main policy goals of the Jeju local government. So for those policy goal, subnational diplomacy also orientating to the improvement of the global peace and human rights. So as a conclusion, I mean, subnational diplomacy's partners and stakeholders very much depend on the identity of the local government. This is one point. And lastly, the landscape of the subnational diplomacy in the current period, I think there are two things that we have to carefully watch. One is that the geopolitics, The other one is kind of de-globalization. I think those two elements make the subnational diplomacy very much in prospering because geopolitics make a national diplomacy the lack of the international cooperation. That's one element, and the other one is that de-globalization make international cooperation less likely. But subnational diplomacy, as I said before, their main function is the betterment of the local residents. If there is an interest for local residents, they pursue their international cooperation. For example, like for Jeju, try to get the more international direct flight. Governor have to go to China and Singapore to talk about the possibility of the setting up the direct international flight. And also, there is a Jeju famous, black pork, those kind of things. Very, very popular in the Southeast Asian countries. Then extending those export of that product to those areas, government should go outside. Even though de-globalization is one of the main dominant the factor in the global economy, but still local governments try to go global because of the betterment of their residents. So those two landscape also affect why subnational diplomacy is currently in popularity. So let me stop here.
Christian?
Thank you very much. When flying from Munich to Seoul, this is roughly 10,000 kilometers, and it was a flight time of 11 hours, roughly. And when you fly, normally you'd have this in-flight information system in front of you, and you see the globe, and you see the aeroplane, and you see the time at the destination and where you come from and how long it takes. And then I thought, well, now I'm flying for 11 hours. And how many of those hours do we fly over nations or countries where subnational diplomacy is welcomed? And I calculated, I thought at the end it was maybe 3 hours, and 9 hours we flew over landmass where maybe it is not a good idea to even start subnational diplomacy, because it can be dangerous for one's life. So that saying is as a prerequisite for subnational diplomacy, you need a certain degree of democracy. You need a certain openness of the state you live in. That is what sprang to mind when I come over here, and I do it very quickly because it's only 7 minutes. I do have the feeling many good inputs come from grassroots, come from individuals, come from NGOs. And my suggestion to the governments would be use these ideas, use these individuals, and take up their ideas and help them develop the idea to a certain level, and from there lift it up onto the international level. Like that, many good ideas can be transferred and can make our lives better. Thank you very much.
Misha?
Well, I will be very fast here at the end. I would just like to say that when we think of subnational diplomacy, we should make it broader than governments. You know, many of the panelists here have mentioned NGOs, universities. Certainly, Professor Haddad has done so much work analyzing subnational diplomacy. I think work done at the universities is important. Business organizations, art organizations. You know, in Washington, D.C., there's a group of people who work at the Smithsonian Art Institution, and they take groups over to Europe to look at art museums in Europe. And to me, that was, it had not occurred to me that there were such organizations, but was a fascinating example of people with a very specific area of interest meeting with people in different countries who have that same area of interest. So I would just emphasize that diplomacy is more than just government-to-government relationships. It's every aspect of society. It's different ways that people can connect.
That was very well put. And in my personal experience, I have to say that cultural diplomacy is very important because when you hear people who are cultural ambassadors talking about their role in bringing different societies together, they are extremely enthusiastic about it, and they can give you a litany of examples of where they felt they made a difference. And I'm just thinking most recently of hearing the president of Carnegie Hall speak on this topic, and the director of the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. We have a few minutes left for questions. Does anyone have a burning question they would like to ask? Ambassador Chung.
Thank you very much. It's really great pleasure for me to meet with Mr. Latif in one of the several months, and to meet with Professor Haddad. I think if I add one more element in order to promote more local diplomacy, it is leadership. Leadership matters. As Governor Kotoda already mentioned, I think he expressed strong willingness to be engaged with the provincial areas of neighboring countries. It is the same to Jeju Island. I think Governor O is really enthusiastic about expanding local diplomacy. That's very important. Actually, right now I'm currently working for UNITAR Jeju International Training Center. Jeju, a special self-governing province, wanted to host international organizations like us, actually. And we invite leaders from Asia-Pacific developing countries. Mostly they are coming from local areas. So when they come to Jeju Island, they enhance their understanding on the positive side of Jeju Island. So when they go back to their home country, they promote the positive image of Jeju Island. So hosting international organizations like us will be also beneficial to promoting the local diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Governor would like to react to your remarks.
いや今のお話すごく大事でですね、私も知事になって1年ですが、アジアにもいろいろお邪魔させていただいてます。で、我々先進、民主的な国、そういった国はこういった議論さらにプログレスしていくべきだと思うんですけど、やっぱり同時に我々の役割は今おっしゃったように途上国におけるまだセントラライゼーション、いわゆる中央集権がまだ続いている国々にですね、どう地方分権がもたらすその先ほど教授がおっしゃった経済的利益、外交的利益があるかっていうこともですね、我々の役割じゃないかなと思いました。で、あるアジアの国ね、知事とも何人も会いましたが、なんか自分で決められないということをですねすごく感じて、結局その国のBOI インベストメントボード・オブ・インベストメントですかね、そういったところと MOU を結んで、それからいわゆるプロビンスに落としていくって、こういう順番になってしまう国もあるんでですね、ぜひ今おっしゃったように我々の役割はさらに そういうアジアまた世界の途上国のですね方々に地方分権というのは素晴らしいんだということを発信する。これは多分国はやらないと思います。政府レベルではやはり地方分権であり続けたいという国も地方集権であり続けたいという国もあるでしょうけど、そこはもう民主主義の進化と同時に地方分権の進化をぜひ一緒にやっていきたいと思いました。
Thank you, Governor Kotoda. I have been asked to wrap up in 4 minutes, but I'm going to do it in the remaining time, 36 seconds, by sharing best practices, fostering cooperation, and amplifying the voices of local communities. Subnational entities can contribute to international efforts to address critical global challenges. It is essential that we recognize the importance of subnational diplomacy and support the efforts of subnational entities to work together towards a more sustainable and peaceful world. Thank you, and I would like to please join me in thanking this outstanding panel.
그럼 이것으로 이번 세션을 마치겠습니다.